Hey guys, quick heads up before I start the video. The link down below takes you to my Patreon, where you can download the project files for this video. Also gain access to my premium tutorials and in-depth courses where we build games together from start to finish. Check out my Patreon below, gain direct access to years of experience so that you can start working on your dream game tomorrow. Hello everybody and welcome back to a new episode of my multiplayer Bean Battle Royale tutorial series. So in the last episode we set up the airplane. So if I just click on 2 players here and hit play. Now we see that in the last episode we set up the airplane to actually be able to spawn. So if we take a look at our 2 characters here, we got our beans. The game notices that we got 2 players at minimum and starts a 15-second countdown. After the 15-second countdown is ready, we both get spawned into the airplane. The beans can then stand on the edge and they can then jump out. So I can go like and jump out of the actual airplane. And then with the client here, we can also now jump out of the actual airplane. And there we go. But yeah, what you see at your typical Battle Royale is that you can, of course, jump out of that airplane and then have a parachute and use a parachute. So that's what we're going to be working on in this video. Now, also what we set up, of course, is that the airplane spawns from all different directions. So that's already very cool. So let's go ahead and get started on making that parachute functionality. So to get that started, I want to let you guys know that in the assets folder here, if we now go to props, then we added a new prop, which is the parachute itself. So we're going to be using this type of parachute. Now, if you take a look at PUBG, there's like a rectangle type parachute. So every game does it different, of course. But since this tutorial series is about how to code multiplayer and the general logic of multiplayer, I just decided to keep it simple and stick to this type of parachute. So you do not have like an ability to hold shift to basically start skydiving down faster, but we can actually steer and use the parachute. So how does it work in some games? Sometimes you get that airplane, it flies over and then you possess the airplane. Then once you press F, your actual character spawns and then you can just press the parachute once to deploy the parachute. What I'm going to be making is more the Call of Duty type setup where you can basically just use the parachute whenever you are high enough in the sky and then click the parachute button. So you can basically just use the parachute, not use the parachute, use the parachute, not use the parachute. Kind of like what you see in Fortnite. You can basically use the glider, not use the glider, etc. And we are basically going to be setting that up on spacebar, which is also our jump button. So that will automatically detect whether or not the character is high enough in the sky, and then we will open up that parachute. So for this, we are going into our, we got our gameplay folder with our gameplay character here. And we got the core folder, which is the parent of this whole gameplay folder. And what we're going to do is for this logic, we're going to code it inside of the core character, since the core character always needs to have the functionality to be able to use this parachute in this game. So a couple things first. If I click on one player standalone and then hit play, then we see that my camera right now is pretty much straight up behind my bean. So that is okay, but I want to change it a little bit. So if we go over to the viewport, then typically what you see in Battle Royale games is that the camera is a bit more offset. So if we select the spring arm here, then basically what I want to do is I want to put it up a little bit. So let's say 100 and let's do it at something like -50, so that we're a little bit more to the right here. And I also increased this length from 300 to 350. Now, of course, you guys can just download the project files to this whole tutorial series and then can edit this as however you like. But yeah, this is kind of the camera angle that I'm gonna go for right now. And then once we start working on the gun in a couple episodes from now, then the camera obviously has to zoom in and stuff. Then we will basically clean all of this up a little bit. So now that we got this camera spring arm out of the way, then let's go ahead and set up the parachute. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and click on the capsule here, then click on add, and then we're gonna be adding the static mesh, and we're gonna be calling it SM_parachute. So SM stands for static mesh. Then we're gonna go over to the right and click type in shoot. So there we go for the parachute. We're gonna hook it up. So this gives us the preview of what that would look like. Now I do want to put this up a little bit. Let's say, yeah, something like this is fine. And then by default, we do not want this parachute to be visible. So if we have the parachute selected, then we can scroll down and then we see visible on the rendering, and we're gonna turn that off. And then we hit compile and save. But what we also need to do is with this parachute selected here, we also want to make sure that it does not have collision. So for the collision up here, we're also going to say to no collision. As what you typically see is that your character would have collision, but not the actual parachute itself. All right, so that brings us then to the event graph where we can now go ahead and start actually coding this. So to code this, we want to do it on the spacebar. Now, spacebar is our input action jump. So basically, if we hold spacebar, we want to parachute, and then if we release spacebar, we don't want to parachute. And then there should be some logic that checks if we actually can parachute or not. So first of all, we're going to make ourselves a little variable here, and what we call this is basically wants to parachute question mark. And what this variable does is that it's basically going to determine what we want. So we're going to hook it up like this and like this. Then we're going to extend this a little bit. So if you're pressing spacebar, then we want to parachute. If we release spacebar, we do not want to parachute. So now we as the client know that we want or don't want this, but now it's also important that the server knows whether or not we want or don't want to parachute. So we're going to right click here, create ourselves a custom event and call it SR set wants to parachute. So just like this, and the SR stands for server. So with this event selected, we're going to go up to replicates and click on run on the server, and we're going to make it a reliable event. This ensures that even if there is a lot of networking data coming through, that this event will still get executed, even if you have a bit of lag. And then what do we want to hook up to this event? We also want to hook up the variable over here, so that the server also knows whether or not we want to or don't want to. So with the variable hooked up like this, we can just get the value and plug it in like this, and there we go. Then we can select it, press C to put a comment around it, and let's just say set wants to parachute. And in front of this, we can write server set wants to parachute, just like that. All right, so not only do we locally want to know if we want to parachute as the offline player, because keep in mind, we are inside of the character class right now, our bean, and characters exist on the server and on all clients. So not only we want to know this, but the server also wants to know this. So to execute this, we're going to type in SR set wants to parachute. Now we could either just turn it on here, or we can simply hook it up, because then the value that we put in here gets sent through. And then we're going to do the same here. So we're just going to hook it up like that. And there we go. So now we know what we want. The server knows what we want. So if we turn ourselves on right here, then the server also is on, and then basically we are in sync. Then next up, we basically need to know if we actually can parachute. So next to knowing that we want to, we also need to know, can we? And we're going to determine that based on our height. So how are we going to do that? If we take a look at our bean here, then we basically want to calculate the height of the bean to the floor. So we are going to shoot a line trace straight down from the bean. That's going to determine how high the bean is in the sky. So let's say that our little bean is this high in the sky. Then we can say, okay, that's high enough. At that point, we allow the player to parachute whenever the player wants to. But let's say that the bean is this high above the sky, so only a couple of meters, then we can say we don't want the bean to use the parachute anymore. So let's go ahead and make ourselves a little function like that, which we are going to do here. So under functions, we're going to hit plus, and then we're going to call this function can use parachute question mark. And then what we need to code here is the following. So first of all, we need to basically find our floor. So how high we are away from the floor. Now Unreal has a function for that pre-built. So you could actually say line trace and actually shoot a line trace yourself with some kind of logic to calculate the floor height. But Unreal Engine already has a function built in for us. So if we drag in the character movement component, we can drag off here and type in find floor. And this function, if you hover over it, it tells you sweeps a vertical trace to find the floor for the capsule at the given location. Okay, so basically in simple, this gives us the trace from the capsule all the way down to a floor. So what do we want to put in here? Well, for the capsule location, we can simply type in get actor location and hook this guy up. And then out of the result here, we're going to drag out of it and click break, which gives us the actual result of the hit. And then out of here, we're going to get the hit result and hit break. We're going to collapse this then, open this guy up, and out of here we get a location. So what's the logic that we're going to do here? We're going to get our actor location. So this is where we are in the world. We're going to right click the vector and split it. And then what we can say is if we subtract our Z from the Z of the hit location, then we basically know how high we are in the sky. So out of location here, where this line trace impacts, we're going to also break this one, collapse this one again. And then we're going to say we're going to subtract ours with this one. So that gives us how high we are in the sky. So first of all, let's go ahead and take a look at it. So if I drag off of here and type in print string, then we get a print string, and then I can hook this guy up here, hit compile, save, and let's see what that does. So in the event graph, we're going to type in event tick, hook this guy up like this, and then we're going to drag our function here, and let's have a look. So if we click play, then we see that we are now at 5.2 meters. All right. Then if I stand on the rock, we see we're still at 5.2 meters. So it actually does the correct height between us and the floor. But if I jump, you see 400, 300, 400, 300. And then something good to keep in mind is that 100 Unreal Engine units is basically a meter. So if I'm jumping right now, then the game tells us I'm jumping 3.7 meters, which is, of course, that would be extremely high in real life. But in a game like this, everything is a bit distorted. So apparently we are now jumping 500, so 5 meters high, and then 3 meters. So yeah, there we go. So what we can say inside of this function, because this function does determine if we can or cannot parachute, is that if the amount that comes out of here is bigger, greater, or equal. So if you're typing, if you just do a little this symbol here to the right, and then you can type, or you can either just type in greater equal, then you get this, and then we can say if it is above 2000, we can parachute, for example. So you could adjust this parameter however you like, but I'm going to say 2000. So what do we want to return on the function? If we click the function, we want to output whether or not we are above the 2000, and then we say we can parachute or we can't. So this parameter here, we're going to change it to, let's say, can parachute, question mark, and we're simply going to hook this up. So right now, if we then hit play, or sorry, if we first print string this, print string, and then put this into here, then if we hit play, then right now it tells us false. So now I can't parachute because I'm not at 2000 units. So 2000 units, how high is that at minimum? That's 20 meters basically. Since 100 is 1 meter, 2000 is 20 meters. But then what we can test is if we have the viewport open here, we can click here and click on current camera location as our spawn location. So now if I go high in the sky and then click on play, then we see true, 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 false. So there we go. So now we got a function that basically calculates for us if we can or cannot use the parachute. But then we do see that this function is an executable function. And what we rather have is that this function is a pure function. Because all we need to know is whether or not we can. We don't really have to have it and have execution pins. So if we select the function over here, or on the left, you can also select it here. Then we can click on pure, and that gives us this beautiful little node, which just returns us the value that we want to know. So now that we know whether or not we can parachute, then we're basically on tick gonna check if we want to parachute. And if we want to parachute and we can parachute, then we're going to parachute. But if we don't want to parachute, then we're not going to parachute. So what we're going to do right now is make a new variable, which will basically determine if we are actually parachuting. So we can basically just call this is parachuting. And we can add a question mark behind this one. Okay, so first of all, on tick, we need to check, do we want to parachute? So if we hook this guy up like this, then we got this logic. Now, if we do not want to parachute, then we can set that logic up very quickly. So if we do not want to parachute, then we're just going to do a simple check. to say, okay, I don't want to parachute, but then in case that I am parachuting, then we're simply going to turn it off. So this is all the logic that we're going to do off of false. So if I don't want to parachute, but I turn out to still be parachuting, then we make sure that we are not parachuting. And then it basically turns it off in one tick, and then all the rest of the ticks are just going to go out of here and not going to consume much for us. And then basically up here, we're just going to say, okay, if I want to parachute, then how can we determine if we are parachuting? By determining if we can parachute. So that's the logic that we want up here. Then if we select all of this, we can put a comment around it and just call it parachuting logic, something like that. So how do we then actually make that parachute visible? Well, both the server and the client execute this tick for this character. So now that the server and the client execute this tick, then we can also say, okay, if the server executes this logic as well, then we can make this one a wrap notify. And as I explained before, what a wrap notify is if the value is set in a wrap notify, it executes a corresponding or basically an attached function. So what we're going to do is if we are parachuting, then we want this wrap notify to be responsible for actually showing us the parachute. But not only that, we also want this wrap notify to then be responsible for actually giving us different types of values over here so that we can start gliding. So first thing that we're going to do is select this variable and make it a wrap notify. Then we're going to hit compile and save, and there we go. And then the next thing that we do is that we know that a wrap notify executes on the server and on all the clients. So if the server basically sets this one up, then this function that it is attached to, this function over here, will automatically execute. So the first thing that we want to do when this function executes, and if it is set to true or false, is that we want to set the visibility of the parachute static mesh, so this guy. So we're going to drag it in, and then whatever we are going to attach in this new visibility is whether or not we are parachuting. So we're going to hook it up. So we can already go ahead and give this a quick little test. So to now test this out, what we're going to do is that, well, first of all, we had our setting here to spawn at the camera location. We're going to spawn it at the default location again. Then we're going to set our number of players to 2, and this time we're going to play as a listen server that we can test with the server and the client. So let's actually just make them go into the airplane. So here we got our 2 little beans. They can see each other. So on the right here is my server, on the left is my client. Right now they cannot parachute, so that's great. So let's wait till this is done. And boom. Okay, so both of my beans are in the airplane. We're going to put them both on the edge and see if they can see each other actually using the parachute. So the client is going to wait here first, and then the server is going to jump out. So here we go. Boom. And the client doesn't see the parachute. But does the client see their own parachute, and does the server see the client parachute? So let's look at the airplane. Here comes the client. Oh, yep. So the server does see the client parachute, but the client does not see the server parachute. So if we go into our character here, then we can quickly see why that is. You guys can probably already guess it as well. That is because we need to replicate this variable. So if you select this variable, set it to replicated, then everything is properly replicated. So how come that the server could see the client before this was replicated, but the client, not the server? Well, in case that you are the client exists on the server and on the client itself. The server only exists on the server. So basically what that means is if I am the server and I'm doing it, I'm putting this to true, and then I'm putting this to true. But that means that the client that's going to execute the event tick for the server character on the client side instance will never know that this is true. And because of that, it will always go off of false and never display that parachute. Even though it's getting updates from the server with the wrap notify here, it will basically just keep saying that it's not true because we locally set it to not be true. So, and then how can it be that the server can see the client's parachute? Well, in case of the client would basically just set it locally and set it on the server. So because the client did send it to the server, but the server not to the client, then the server could see the client's parachute and the client not the server parachute. So to make the client also able to see the server parachute, we need to set this variable to be replicated, since now if the server basically does it locally and executes it on the server, then at least the client via replication will get it here and will be able to execute this event tick logic for that server's character. character in their own local instance. And now the client executes it locally and on the server. That means that the server and the client are basically agreeing with each other that we want to show the parachute, and then it would also work. So by simply setting this one to replicate it, and then if we hit play, then we can test it once more to see if they can see each other's parachutes. So here we go, in 3, 2, 1, into the airplane. Okay, so we're both gonna stand on the edge again. And then here's the server on the right. So the server is now going to simply jump out and hold spacebar. Client sees the parachute. Then the server is gonna look at the airplane. Client is gonna jump out, and the server also sees the client parachute. So now everybody sees everything, and that's great. So now we go to the last part of the puzzle, which is basically making sure that we can actually float. So as we see, we're falling very fast right now. So to do that, we're also going to go back into this function, which is responsible for us actually parachuting. And we're going to do the following logic. First of all, we're going to check if we are parachuting or not. So if we are parachuting, then we basically want to say that we change our velocity so that we can kind of feel like we're gliding. So instead of messing with the gravity and other types of settings, we are going to basically just manipulate the velocity so that we go less fast. And if we go less fast, then that's basically what a parachute does for us. So what we're going to say is we're going to type in get velocity. And then we're going to right click the vector and hit split. And then out of the Z here comes the velocity for us going up or down. So in the case that you're going up, your Z velocity would be positive. It could go into the thousands if you're going up very fast. Now in case that you're going down, like jumping out of an airplane, your Z velocity will be negative. So this will be like -1 all the way to maybe -5,000, depending on how fast you fall. So what we're going to be saying is that we do not want to fall super fast. Check out Cactus Center right now on Steam and Early Access. It's a very fun multiplayer video game, cheaper than a Starbucks coffee. So if you want to have a good time with your friends or strangers, click that link down below. And I appreciate every single one of you. And enjoy the rest of the video. Bye! So first of all, we need to get kind of an idea of how fast we're falling. So what we're going to do is drag out of here and type in print string to kind of have an idea of how fast this character is typically falling. So to do that, let's do one player standalone, go here, click here, current camera location, let's go all the way in the sky and see what it prints strings. So if I'm falling and I hold spacebar, it will just say hello, hello, hello. That's because we put it into the duration. Obviously this needs to go here in the string. So if I'm in the viewport and then hit play, we fall out of the sky. We see I'm falling at -4,000. So at maximum speed, because with gravity and mass, of course, a character will sometimes reach a maximum falling speed, right? We see that it goes all the way from 2,000, -3,000 to -4,000. Okay, so that's a pretty high value. So what we're going to do is that we're basically going to say, if we are less or equal, then let's try -750. In that case, we want to slow the velocity and clamp it between 750, but -750 and 0. So to do that, we're basically going to get our velocity. And then if we grab our character movement component and drag out of here, then we can say set velocity. And then we get this node. And then if this is true, so if our speed is basically lower than -750, which means we're falling faster than 750, so this would be -3,000, -4,000, etc. That would all come out of the true here. Then in that case, we basically want to override the Z velocity to be lower. So we're going to right click this. Now for the X and the Y, we do not need to manipulate those velocities, so we're going to put those back in. But for the Z, we're going to say, let's clamp it. So clamp float, and then we're going to hook this up, and then we're going to clamp it between minimal 750 and max, let's say 0. So if we are going 3,000 down, so that means -3,000, then let's make it at minimum 750. But let's say that we're already going very slow, so we're already going -400, then it is just between these values of ours. So then we say, okay, that's fine, then we just keep at the value that we're already going at. So this should actually slow us down, and it should visualize the effect of us being able to jump like a parachute. So right now we're gonna basically just hit play here. I'm falling, 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 and I got a pretty high velocity. I get my little parachute, and there we go. So now I got a pretty nice glide. I get close enough to the floor and the parachute automatically cuts off. So there we go, guys. That's basically how we made a multiplayer parachute. Now we're going to go ahead and give it one final little test. So we're going to hit save all. Then we're going to click 2 players, listen server, and we want to spawn at the default player start and hit play. So here we got the little server bean on the right, client bean on the left, and we got the countdown going. Okay, so 3, 2, 1, and into the airplane. So now we're going to put them both on the edge. So we're going to put our server on the edge here, like this. And then let's also put our client on the edge here, like this. So first of all, we're going to jump with the server. We're also going to have to check if it's actually floating like a parachute. So here we go. Whoop, and fly. Then I can release, do it again, and release, do it again. And then when I hit the floor, it's going to cut off. There we go. And now it's time for the client to jump. So here we got the client, jumps out and flying. It's very smooth. And then we let go, hold spacebar, and it's super smooth. So there we go. That's basically how we made a cool replicated parachute with actual gliding logic as well. So that's great. Yeah, so that sums it up, guys. That's basically it for this video. Now, if you do want the airplane to be able to fly higher than what we saw in the previous video, is that we set up this airplane spawner with which we go to the detail panels. We see it's at 8,000. So what we could do is that we could increase this to, say, 15,000. Just like that. So then you have a little bit more room to actually fly, which is fun. Or we could maybe just increase it to 20,000 so that we fly a little bit higher. So let's do it one more time because it looks so cool. So let's do 2 players. Here we go. Play. This time I'm going to make the windows a bit bigger. So let's put this one here, this one here. Okay, so 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And there we go. So we're both inside of the airplane. We're going to stand on the edge. This guy is also going to stand on the edge. So, woo, and then we hold spacebar. We see the server gliding. And this one goes down lower, 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 lower. And then I'll do the spacebar again. And then we can land somewhere over here. Then we're going to look up at our other little bean. This guy's now going to jump out. Woo, and parachute. And now we see this guy parachuting as well. So yeah, it looks pretty funny. It's a nice mechanic. It's very smooth also. So that is it for this video, guys. Now be sure to check it out on the Patreon if you want to get access to the project files so that you can play with this yourself or change it everything a little bit. Maybe you want to swap out the bean with an actual character, right? Then feel free to do all of that. So guys, that was it for this video. If you liked it, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. That helps out the channel a lot. I appreciate you guys, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.